speaks in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 24, then comes the end. He's not going to make up another end. My opponent will have more ends than will be done. Here an end, there an end, everywhere an end. And I suggest to you, there is one great end in the Scripture speaks at the second and the final coming of Christ took place in the fall of Jerusalem. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs until now. He's not talking about the rocks and the trees and the birds and the trees and the bees. He's talking about the old covenant world. Thus my Lord will come all the saints with you when Jesus returned in A.D.70 when the temple fell. The dead saints were raised. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 5 proves it. It fits perfectly with the law and the prophets. Our views fit perfectly with the law and the prophets. Jesus said in Matthew 24:31, He will send His angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together the elect from the four winds from one end of heaven to the other. That's resurrection. He doesn't understand the voice of the prophets. 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 The voice of the prophets.
And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its destruction is near. Let those in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart. For these are the days of vengeance, of great tribulation. Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 22. Matthew 24, verses 16 and 21. The Roman army numbered in the tens of thousands. More than 80,000 soldiers were encamped about Jerusalem. The Jews numbered as many as 3 million, including women, children, elderly, and others that came in for the Feast of the Tabernacles, as seen in Acts chapter 2. The storehouses had limited resources because most had been destroyed by the rebels within. Thus, when the Romans severed Jerusalem's supply routes, a famine resulted in which many, under great pains of hunger, would go out of the city walls at night to gather wild plants. Hundreds were caught each night and crucified in the morning. Crosses and blood covered nearly every 10 feet of the valley of Jehoshaphat and near Golgotha, where Christ was crucified, and near where hundreds of Jews had said concerning Christ, "Let him be crucified. Let his blood be on us and on our children." Matthew chapter 27, verses 23, 25, and 33. This went on until there was not enough wood left for crosses. So thousands starved to death and thousands were captured and tortured to death. Yet the cries of mothers and babies would not move the fanatics, the zealots, and those that would rather die than see Romans occupy the temple. The time had come. The prophecy of the temple spoken by Christ would be fulfilled. For he said, "Truly I say to you, not one stone here shall be left upon another." Matthew 24 and 2. There were great quantities of gold and silver which had to be placed in the temple for safekeeping. This melted and ran down between the rocks into the cracks of the stones that formed the temple and the wall around it. When the Roman soldiers finally took the city in their greed to obtain this gold and silver, they took long bars and pried apart these massive stones. Thus, quite literally, not one stone was left standing.
I started getting to a position where I started teaching others, and I started doing more of my own homework, so to speak, instead of relying on what I've been taught by others, I started seeing some passages and some things that I just could not harmonize with how I had been taught. I still accepted the things I was taught. I still would teach others the things that I was taught, the same traditional way, because I did not have an answer. My whole paradigm was looking for a futurist, physical, carnal type of an event on a physical cloud, a physical tooting of a horn, and a physical coming with physical fire, and all these things upon the trees, and I couldn't wrap my mind around how to explain it any otherwise. So I held to our traditional views. And so, as I was reading, two passages in particular really hit me hard. That's Matthew 5:17 and 18, and that's Luke 21:20 through 32. Matthew 5:17 and 18, Jesus says, "Think not that I come to destroy the law and the prophets. I've not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Verily, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle of the law shall cease till all be fulfilled." And I started thinking, till heaven and earth pass, we're still under every jot and tittle of the old law. And I'm looking, heaven and earth, as I was taught, this physical paradigm is still here, but I know the old law is past. How does this work? Well, that opened my mind to looking at a different perspective of heaven and earth. And I started doing a study, and we get into the book of Revelation and 2 Peter 3, some other places. I started discovering that heaven and earth, Matthew 24:35, doesn't mean the physical planet, the physical earth. Going through a study of the book of Revelation, following Forey Wallace's outline, which I too believed originally it was written in a later date, but after reading Forey Wallace, I was convinced, no, it was early. And one thing led to another. And as I studied my Old Testament, and as I looked at these passages, I saw these things were spiritual in their nature, not physical.
Let me first say, Mike, I really appreciate the opportunity to take a few moments and to kind of chronicle my journey to fulfillment, what we call fulfillment of prophecy. I had one time been an instructor at Tennessee Bible College, and I taught the book of Revelation. I had taught it for some time from the early date, believing that the bulk of the work that John was revealing had reference to the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. After I left Tennessee Bible College and started preaching at the Lakeshore Church of Christ, we studied the book of Revelation again. In that third time through that I had taught the book of Revelation, something became very, very glaring to me. If it's the case that the bulk of the book of Revelation is about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, which was my position, how could there be another revelation outside the Revelation? Now, for a while, I assumed that Revelation chapter 20 and the 1,000-year reign was in our future. And then John came back to the new heavens, the new earth, and the new reality. I had a private thought to myself about maybe the 1,000-year reign is a matter of quality and not quantity. Maybe it's simply a concept of perfection. And in fact, I found later that Adam dies at 930 years old. Jesus is baptized at 30, comes in 70. He completes what Adam lost 1,000 years. Made sense to me. So I began to think that the entirety of the book of Revelation was about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And then I asked myself this question. If the great revelation took place in the fall of Jerusalem, how could there be a greater revelation yet in our future, a revealing of Christ outside the revelation?
Matthew 5:17 and 18. And this is where Jesus says, my words, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And so the preacher's name was Mike. He asked, well, what does this mean? So nobody raised their hand, so I raised my hand, and I said it sounds like the law of Moses will continue until the earth is destroyed. And before I even got the last syllable out, he was just saying, no, that's not right. And then the whole class erupted over that, because here's 70, 100 people on this adult class, right? And they all said, that's what it sounds like. He literally had to tell everybody, we're going to stop. We're not talking about this anymore. We're going to move on after the class was pretty much exhausted, time at that point. That's my first looking into it and saying, this doesn't sound right. So I asked him afterwards, well, what does that mean? And here's literally what he told me. Well, you'll understand it when you go to college. That didn't make any sense to me either. If I can't understand it now, how am I going to understand it when I go to college? Now that I look back on it, after, 20, 30 years of explaining it away, when I finally relented and looked at it, and I said, it just means what it means. When I was 17, I got it. But I studied myself out of it for all those years.
So, I believe that the men who studied the Bible for the issues that they faced. And so Roy Deaver became just an expert against antiism because it was a challenge in the church at the time. However, Brother Deaver taught me in class that the entire Old Testament was a type. Now, that was a consternation to me. I thought only you could prove the types which were specifically referred to. He said, no, God never does anything that He doesn't need to do, and He had to reveal all of the Old Testament. It's called the principle of parsimony. Roy Deaver taught me that principle. Now, had Brother Deaver been consistent with that, because in Joshua chapter 5, that means it's a type. Let me tell you what's going on in Joshua chapter 5. There's a 40-year transition, 30 to 70. There's the antitype. He rolls away their sins at Gilgal. He rolls away their sins while He opens heaven. The manna ceases, the miracles cease, Jesus returns. As a matter of fact, Guy Woods believed in 1 Corinthians 1, 6 through 8, that was the destruction of Jerusalem because he was arguing against Franklin, who had become a Pentecostal. He argued that coming was the destruction of Jerusalem, the gifts until the coming of the Lord. Well, I think if they would have been consistent with their views, I think they would have. I don't think it was a great thing. No brother that I know of was serious in their study of the book of Revelation. I never heard really a serious study. But when I did find views, they often differed. So although they were great men and great minds, they defined the issue of the day. But let me say about the book of Revelation. It was shortly to come to pass, Revelation 1:1. Revelation 1:3, the time was at hand. He was coming with the keys of death and Hades, Revelation 1:18. So He was going to open it soon. Going to get Hades out of there by the time the Revelation is completed. He was coming quickly. The book of Revelation ends with the same phrase, shortly come to pass, at hand. That's what the book of Revelation is about. Now, here's the stern warning. If anybody adds to these things, God would add unto him the plagues written in this book. If you take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away your part out of the book of life, out of the holy city, from the things written in this book. I heard Roy Deaver, Tom Warren, Andrew Connolly, all apply Revelation 22, 18, and 19 to instrumental music, the Lord's Supper, authority in the church. Sure, we believe all of that. But John said, first, the book of prophecy. And the only way that we can make sense of it, that the entirety of the book was about to take place. It's a conservative view. We have a conservative view, not a liberal view. We have a conservative view of the book of Revelation. And we believe that's the revealing of Christ. Let me give a New Testament verse for that position. So in Luke 17, 30 and 31, the Bible says, in the day when the Son of Man is revealed, he which is on the house, his housetop and stuff in the house, let him not to come down to take it away. Bill Lockwood, futurists, say that's the end of time. I deny it. It is the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And I remember asking Roy Deaver about the Olivet Discourse when I was a young man. And he said, but of that day and that hour. So Jesus is using this exact same phrase in a complete different way. And I said, okay, Brother Deaver said it. That must be true. But it's not divided, because Jesus is quoting from Zechariah 14:7. And I argued last night, Matthew 24:8, it was the time of sorrows, a unique time of Israel's history. It's the time of Jacob's trouble, where alas, the day is great. When has it ever been heard that a man bears children? But why do I have every man with his hands on his loins? Because it was the time of Jacob's trouble. They're going to birth a new reality, a new heaven, new earth. So it's a time of sorrows. The Greek word odin means birth pangs. Birth pangs to a woman means that before the child is born, the pains get more severe and closer together. That's the birth pangs. That's Romans 8. That's the birth pangs. And so no one knows the day and the hour? Not in our future. They didn't know the day and the hour. Just like a husband and wife don't know the day and the hour of the birth of a child, but they sure know it's near. It wasn't 2,000 years. And when James says it's at hand, he's talking about the same thing. So I appreciate the respect for Bible authority that I learned at Tennessee Bible College. Those men they were bold as a lion what they believed. But if they're contradicting themselves over the book of Revelation, which they often did, I know they didn't have it figured out. So we've missed it, I think, because we haven't really emphasized the book of Revelation like we should have. I think if we had, we would have come to this. And I think we're getting clarity. Let me say this. So Paul Wallace believed it was completely revealed. We got an anti-brother, Art Ogden, believed it was completely revealed. And Gene West thinks it's all about the destruction of Jerusalem. And yet they say there's a greater coming after that. So why? We've been weaning ourselves over post and premillennialism 80 years. Alexander Campbell was a post-millennialist. So I think we're coming to the truth. And I'm thankful. I have so much peace in what I believe. So we better quit.
Thank you, Holger. Appreciate it.